Greetings. This is Caroline Staten with Transition US, and thank you so much for joining our online event today. Our aim with offering these is really to provide practical support to the leaders of transition initiatives, to those who are mulling over starting an initiative, and to community leaders across the country and in other countries who are working on resilience building within their communities. We'd like to offer these teleseminars at no cost, and do ask that you consider making a donation to transitionus.org. That's what really enables all of this to happen. So if you're able to do that, thank you so much in advance. Let me give a little background to this particular teleseminar today. It's Reconomy, where cash takes a back seat. And as we work to transition our world, a huge challenge lies in our ability to power the good work necessary to build a better future. We used to live in a world where money was the thing that enabled things to happen. But with dollars becoming more and more scarce, success will only come if we develop a myriad of alternative economies to empower our work. And the good news is that Transition Lab has figured out all sorts of new ways to create affordable housing, feed their community, and even run a school with a minimum amount of money. Their website is transition-lab.com. So visit that for more information, for great pictures, for a lot of how-tos, and how to launch some of the models that they've developed in your transition communities as well. And now I'll introduce our guest today, Russell Evans. He's the director of Transition Lab, a living laboratory where the nation's most creative young minds gather to build a better future. Transition Lab was also the winner of the MIT CoLab's Local Solutions Contest for creating the most viable, effective, and replicable way to reduce CO2 emissions. So Russell, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm turning it over to you.
Woohoo! Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm looking at the list of all the people, and I know about a third of you. So the third of you that I know, great to have you on. And the two-thirds that I don't know, I'm really happy that you're here, and hopefully this will be really useful for you, and I think it's going to be. So to start, I'm just going to start with a couple questions that you can answer on your polls. The first one is just a yes-no. So one is yes and two is no. First question is, do you currently consider yourself wealthy enough to have your needs met, serve the world, and do what you love? So if you can answer yes to all of those things, you can press 1. And if you say no to even one of those things, press 2.
So we'll give you a few moments to press again 1. If Russell, why don't you name those things again, if you're able to?
Yeah, the question is, do you consider yourself wealthy enough to have your needs met, serve the world, and do what you love and be happy? And so I'm looking at the results here, and it's it's 15 of 16 now of you. The majority have said, and only 33% have said, yes, I am in a position where I can do that. So that already indicates that the way that our economy is set up, it's not necessarily like conducive to creating the kind of change or facilitating the kind of actions that we need to do. Because if we're not able to be happy, serve our communities, and provide for ourselves, then we can't get the work done that really needs to happen to transition this dysfunctional civilization that we have into something that's more sane that we want to raise our grandchildren in. So here's the second question. Whatever job you currently have or whatever you're currently doing, there's going to be 5 different categories. I want to know where the money is currently coming from. So once again, if your money is coming from grants and fundraising, like if you work in the nonprofit sector, press 1. If you're a public servant, like a school teacher or a public official, press 2. Number 3, if you're in a private business, and that could be anything from like you're in a really awesome private business like Patagonia, or you're working on a fracking rig or something like that. Number 4, are you independently wealthy? And you can just afford to do good things because you've got a huge inheritance that hopefully came from a really good source. Or number 5, are you living off of your credit cards? And that could be anybody who's just kind of like scraping by, where they're trying to commit to something and they haven't really found the ways to do that yet.
And I suppose there might be some people that none of those apply, so I suspect we won't hear from them. But again, pressing 1 for grants and fundraising, 2 for public servant, 3 for private business, 4 you're independently wealthy, and 5 living off of credit cards. And we got the results, I think, Russell.
Yeah, and so looking at it, basically, there's a couple of us that are working in the nonprofit sector. There's a couple more that are public servants, but the majority of the people here are involved in some kind of private business, professional business. And why I wanted to ask that question is because I think we all realize that even if we are in a private business, if we look at the way that the economy has really shifted in the last 5 years, it might be pushing along if you're a derivatives investor or something like that, but the economy isn't doing great. Kind of a funny anecdote is, I don't know if any of you guys listened to the Planet Money podcast, but they were interviewing some people who have this machine that the Fed uses to predict like economic futures given on various circumstances. And they said, you know what, we're tired of depressing information. Let's see if we could if we could just put in solutions that were totally unviable, would that really change the way that the unemployment rate is? And so they did things like they could just press a button in this computer model, say like the U.S. no longer had any national debt, and there was peace in the Middle East, and there was peace in Russia with Ukraine, and all these things. And even when they did that, they could only lower unemployment by about 1% in the developed world, and it didn't really do much to address development elsewhere. And so I think that just points to what we know in all directions, is that money is becoming very, very, very scarce. So at Transition Lab, I started Transition Lab with $3,000. And last year we came out $267 in the black. This year our total budget is about $20,000, and we'll be able to have a little bit more profit. But I'm bringing that up because the amount of money that we're dealing with is extremely small. And it's extremely small because we found that it's really scarce. When we were trying to set up Transition Lab, we did all of the things that we were told to do. We tried looking into grants. We tried finding the secret millionaire. We tried getting local funding. And when we tried all of those things, sure, there were sources of money that were out there, but none of them were truly sustainable. And if we're trying to create a sustainable future, it's kind of hard to do that when you apply for a grant for 5 years, and then after that the grant just dies and disappears and all your work is lost. And so what we had to really do from the get-go is figure out ways that we could make our models work on a shoestring, and that's what I want to share with you. So we set out, I was a little late getting it out, but we sent out a PDF of a talk that I gave about 3 alternative economies that work.
And
if you have that PDF,
let me
go ahead.
We did send it out this morning to people, but if you registered after that, it's on our website, transitionus.org, and if you click on this event on the home page, it'll take you to the landing page for this teleseminar, and a link is there to the PDF. So go ahead and get that. And for those of you that aren't able to, Russell has assured me that you can follow well without the PDF and pick it up later as well.
Yeah. So the first the first idea is that, okay, we know that dollars have become scarce, so we need alternatives. And what we've been doing so far is we've been used to thinking of money as the power, the thing that powers action. But if we can figure out alternatives that can pay for projects, then we're going to give ourselves a much better success and better rate of success. And the thinking for all this really came from the TED Talk I saw by Jaime Lerner. He was the former mayor of Curitiba, Brazil, and they've created incredible public transport there. They've created an incredible park structure. They've just done an awesome job doing the kinds of things that we need to do on a transition scale. And one of the things he said in his talk is, if you want to be creative, just take a zero out of your budget. And if you want to be really creative, take 2 zeros out of your budget. And to give you an idea of this, when I wrote the original business plan for Transition Lab, it was going to cost me $250,000 to launch and operate the first year. Couldn't find any of the funding, had to become more creative. And so I heard a lot about things like time banks. I'd heard a lot of things about like Bitcoin, alternative currencies, and to see if those would actually work. And I started looking into a lot of that. I took a course even with Bernard Leater back in 2001 about complementary currencies. And through my experience, I figured out some defining qualities of the ones that work depending on your businesses. And I think that that's going to be really useful. So here's a couple of examples of things that work. These are the principles that I've distilled. Number one, and this is slide number 4 if you're following along, is you have to make sure that the project makes money. You can't get rid of cash completely. There are a lot of people who, in the progressive realms, say that what we really need is to get completely away from the dollar economy. Maybe that's true, but I don't see any way to get from here to there. And so here's a couple examples of that are actually working. CSA work shares and woofing are both examples where the cash economy still plays a big part, but there's a lot of alternative economy stuff going on. So for example, we're members of a CSA where they have, and I'm assuming everybody knows that a CSA is a community-supported agriculture project. It's a garden called Circle A Garden, and what they do is they give out a share of food once a week for 9 months of the year here in Colorado. They charge about $1,400 for it, and it's the best CSA that I've ever seen anywhere. So they sell 35 shares. They bring in a whole bunch of money based on their shares. But for them, it's not very difficult to grow food for 40 people as opposed to just 35 people. So what their business plan is they actually grow an excess amount of produce to feed people who are willing to come out and work on the farm so that they don't have to pay the cash. And they're still able to bring in enough cash to pay for the infrastructure necessary to run the farm, things like their taxes, things like their hoses, things like their black plastic. It is really hard, as we all know, to exist in this economy and to make any kind of an impact without using dollars. The reason that this works is because they aren't getting rid of cash. They're just using cash to pay the bills that cash has to pay for, and they've found ways to create wealth that they can then pass on and exchange for a different kind of wealth, in this case being labor. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is economies only work when the value of an exchange is clearly defined. And this works for the cash economy as well as like any kind of alternative economy. If you're looking at the slide, I put a picture of a $5 or $6 latte in there. And the reason I did that is because what's interesting about the cash economy is even though I may not be able to afford a $6 latte, and I might even think that's ridiculous, and maybe somebody can buy me one for my birthday once a year, we're okay with the idea of a $6 latte existing in our culture because we can determine that, okay, this is a 40-ounce latte that's decorated with artesian art and super good coffee, and I don't have to pay that $6, but I can understand what this is. And where I see this falling apart all the time in alternative economies is when the fairness is not clear. So for example, when I was talking about the CSA relationship where we go out and we work on the farms in exchange for food, if I say, hey, you're going to get to go out and work on an organic farm, what that means for Circle A Gardens is we're going to go and we're going to work our butts off weeding and pulling tape and being out in the hot sun. And another person might think, oh, wow, working in an organic farm means I get to pick strawberries and put a bunch of them in a bucket, and then I get to eat some of them while I'm out there. And in that kind of thing, what's key is the relationship is clear. When the relationship isn't clear, then people develop resentments, and they just want to return to the cash economy. Because at least in the cash economy, if you pay a certain price, you can have a general expectation that you're going to have that met. So what we did is we really tried to figure out how we could launch a college that would provide affordable housing and feed people and provide an education without any money. And the reason that I brought up these two ideas before, one, that we couldn't get rid of cash entirely, but two, that we needed to have really, really clear relationships, comes in the form of what's called a skilled resident exchange. And this is the first thing that Transition Lab did back in 2010. And the idea was really simple. I had a friend who was an organic farmer, and he was also a 2-star Michelin chef, of all things. So he was a really good cook and a really good organic farmer, but the current economy didn't provide any way for him to make a living doing either of those things. There weren't enough cooking positions in our town, and you couldn't make a go of it as an organic farmer. And he also had a lot of debt, which is really common in the United States for young people right now. I, at the same time, was teaching high school. My wife was working at the hospital. We were both paying our mortgage. And so we couldn't quit our jobs because of rule number 1. We had to keep participating in the cash economy to pay our debts and to pay our bills. But we really wanted to be doing more of what we loved. And so did my friend. Since we owned a house, we said, hey, look, we've got a guest bedroom, so why don't we try something out? Why don't, instead of you paying rent in the cash economy, why don't we just do a labor exchange where you work 10 to 15 hours for us, becoming our full-time chef and gardener? That will save you between $500 and $600 a month on cash. We won't have to pay you anything, because I certainly couldn't afford a personal chef or a personal gardener. And you can also have a job on the side that you can use to pay off your debt. And so what we created out of this relationship was a situation where over 7 months, our friend Evan moved in with us. He cooked for us. He gardened for us. We created affordable housing. We created abundant food. And he was able to pay off $4,000 to $5,000 of his credit card debt because he had a job on the side. And when we saw this, the reason that it worked is because the relationship was really clear. We weren't getting rid of cash entirely. We were even basing the rent exchange with us off of the current economy. And how we did that was we just said, okay, what does rent run for a single bedroom in Montrose? And that's about $500 a month, plus some utilities make it $600 a month. What's a good base manual wage, manual labor wage? $10 an hour. We divided that up, and that's how we arrived at that number. So we were using the existing cash economy to determine fairness, and lots of communication to determine the relationship. And we created all of those things. And here's what's remarkable, and this is where I really hope that all of you out there listening start, the gears in your head start turning. If I go to any community in the United States of America and I say, hey, raise your hand if you have $500 a month to commit towards local transition initiative actions, whether that be community gardening, whether that be providing food access, whether that be creating affordable housing, or whether that be like being active in the political process. If I ask that question, who has $500 to commit to it a month? Hardly anybody does, because money is becoming scarce. But on the other hand, if I say, how many people out there are either in their 50s and they have vacant guest bedrooms that are vacant 98% of the year, except when their in-laws come, or how many people are in their 20s who are having a hard time paying rent and not really participating in jobs that they really love, when I ask that question, then everybody's hands go up. So what that tells me is that the world is ready to transition, and we have the model to transition. We just need to do it, and we need to do it without cash. There still needs to be cash somewhere. Somebody needs to pay the mortgage, but there's some radical ways that we can do this. So rule number 3, this gets us to, we need to use alternative economies to meet needs in ways that are better. And here's what I mean by that. On one hand, the cash economy is really nice because I can go anywhere and exchange dollars for anything. And I exchange dollars and I walk away. But the problem with that is that it completely cuts us off from any kind of relationship with the people and the products that we need for our day-to-day sustenance. And the best example of this is Walmart. You go to Walmart and you can buy stuff for extremely cheap, but we all know that there's all these problems associated with that organization because it is so separate. And I think that the biggest challenge of our times isn't necessarily even climate change. I think it's that we live in isolation from virtually every part of our life. We have no idea where our food comes from. We have no idea who our neighbors are across the street. We have no idea how to influence the political process. We live isolated lives. And so what I found that we're doing with Transition Lab is that by creating all these affordable housing relationships and relationships with farms to provide our own food, suddenly instead of using cash to meet all our needs, we're using relationship. And here's a question that I want to ask you right now. Yesterday, when I was talking with my wife and we were giving thanks for all the things we were grateful for, it's a practice that we try to do as often as we can, I started making a list of all of the people who had done something for me without cash, ranging from I had somebody cook dinner for me, I had somebody babysit for me, I had somebody provide food for me. And when I started counting up all the people who participated in my day, there were 14. And that's the kind of genuine wealth that I really am looking forward to in the future. At the same time, I'm only able to have 14 people in relationship doing those kinds of things because I've had very clear expectations. And when I was talking to Carolyn, when we were kind of talking about the talk I was about to give, I was saying, you know what, Transition Lab, we've gone through a really hard month where people have been sick, there's been emotional turmoil, some people have even gone to counselors. I'm bringing this up because relationships are hard work. But that's what transition is. It's recreating the exact things that we need to build a better future. And we've been able to do it without money. Just a side note, I'll probably give a whole talk on the difficulty of relationships and how we've worked through them at a later date. But yeah, what I mean is, rule number 3, we need to use alternative economies to meet needs in ways that are better. Relationships work. And to be replicable, there need to be social and economic reasons to maintain them. So for example, with the skilled resident exchange, what we're doing is we're taking the biggest chunk of somebody's income. When you think of how much money you have to spend every month, the biggest chunk always goes to food, shelter, utilities, and then after that maybe some loans, and then after that some recreation. If we can eliminate that chunk and instead say, hey, you're going to live in a relationship and you don't have to pay that $500, $600 anymore, that's a huge economic incentive for people to say yes. And the reality is, in the cash economy, if it can offer something that is much cheaper and easier, then we're going to be fighting an uphill battle. So an example of this is when people say, well, we just need to convince people to buy food at the farmer's market because it's better for them, when you can buy organic food at City Market that comes from who knows where. That's a battle that we're currently losing. And the reason that we're losing it is because it is so much cheaper, and it's not based in relationship. Whereas what we've done is we've said, okay, well, you don't have to pay for rent or food anymore because we've already just created a straight-up relationship where you can interact with all of those things on a day-to-day basis. And just a kind of side note on this is, I think that most time banks are struggling, and I'm not sure if they're going to be the way to power the revolution, because one, it's difficult to set up all of the relationships necessary with a large group of people to get your basic needs met. It's really good for, like, if you can get your car repaired or a massage, like a specific event that doesn't happen often. But for our day-to-day expenses, we need to be thinking more radically about how we're going to do things. So the slide, slide number 10 is a picture of 27-year-olds pretending to be happy living with their parents. And this is a joke, and I hope you guys are laughing out there. I can't hear you, but the Department of Education just came out with a survey or a study that revealed that if you're 27 right now in this country, you're more likely to make less than $14,000 than more than $40,000. You're also more likely to be living with your parents than you are to be living with roommates. And that's because the economy is crappy. But again, I look at all of this and say, wow, this is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us to rebuild relationships and live in relationship and use creative relationship instead of the cash economy to get the work done. And I'm about to, in a few minutes, I'm going to hand over the phone to some of my students who are actually doing that so you can hear some anecdotes firsthand. My fourth and last rule that we've determined is forget about using money and use what you have in abundance. And this is, it's a permaculture principle, but it's also something that we just kind of ran into. Tuition at Transition Lab for the full year costs $12,500. Some people gasp at that, but it's less than half the cost of a year of college, and we provide there's a 100% return on investment. So we think it's a great deal. But with that said, 2 of our 3 students this year said, hey, I can't pay all that because I've got these student loans and I've got these other things going on that are going to just prevent me from coming up with that kind of money. So we had an abundance of empty slots. And Jake, who was my student last year and is now co-teaching with me, we sat down and we thought about, like, okay, well, what would be things that they could offer us in a gift economy, not a time bank economy, not a cash economy, but in a gift economy that would really be of benefit. And so one of the things that we did is we put an ad on Good Food Jobs, and we said, we'll give you full tuition at Transition Lab if somebody will be my personal chef and then also cook for Transition Lab once a week. And so that was something where I could say, you know what, if I had that extra $10,000, the last thing I would do would be to pay for a personal chef to come and cook for me 4 nights a week for 7 months. But on the other hand, if you just say, okay, I'm not going to get that money, it doesn't exist, but there's all these people out there that want to start farm-to-table businesses and they want to get experience cooking for other people using local materials, there's a huge need for that. So we have somebody, Andrea, who is currently cooking for me 4 nights a week. And then what's great about that is she's kind of the head cook. We all contribute food. It brings people together. It creates relationship. And again, that works to actually transition the world and make it into the world that we want to live in. Another student, Kevin, he had some experience working for a solar company, and he's going to be putting more solar panels on my house as part of his tuition deduction exchange or gift economy, as you might want to call it. And so with these examples, what I really want to point out is all the rules apply. Number one, we can't get rid of cash completely. So I had every student pay what they could, and we, number two, agreed what relationship would be fair. And we spend a lot of time talking about like ways to really clearly define what everybody's doing. And then that gets us to rule number three. We're using these alternative things, these existing resources that are already abundant in our culture, to just meet needs that are better because we're providing affordable housing. We're getting these young people out of their parents' guest bedrooms. We're getting them in the community. We're giving them job training, and we're transitioning our community. And rule number 4, we're using what we do have in abundance. We all have a lot of time. We all have a lot of energy, and we're rocking and rolling. So I think that that's kind of a good place to stop. And I'm actually going to, in a few minutes, hand over the phone to some of my students. But what I wanted to do first is, it's really difficult to give a presentation where I'm just talking to my phone and I can't see anybody's faces or hear if they're laughing at my jokes or sneering at what I'm saying. I can't get a lot of feedback. So I wanted to open it up for a couple of questions right now just to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And then I was going to hand over the phone to some of my students who are right here to talk about how they're personally putting these things into action and how we see greater implementation of these ideas in whatever field there is. Does that sound good, Carolyn?
That sounds great. So if you have a question or comment, press 1 on your keypad and don't be shy. Let's hear from you. Ellen Rainwalker, go ahead.
Hi there. When you started out asking how people got their money, you didn't include retirement income. And in the community I live in, that is the way most of our activists support themselves. Because we have a community with a lot of older people who have retirement money either from the government or from jobs they used to have. And that gives us the time to be involved in all kinds of community groups and activities.
Yes.
Just a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm sure there were probably some other categories that we can be enlightened about too. So thank you for that. And we'll go to Kimberly.
Hi, I just wanted to say thanks. And among my friends, I think everyone shies away from economics. They feel like it's sort of high science. But it's determining sort of their general states of mind and their choices. I'm very excited at how much work is being done to address it.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Kimberly. And Janice Lynn?
Hi, Russell. I've been kind of lurking on the outside of your website. I live in Fort Collins. I would like to start a transition lab. And so are you mentoring people, consulting, that kind of thing, and could we come and visit you?
Yes, and yes. Janice, before I forget, on our website there's a contact form.
Okay.
And just fill that out and give me your basic info, and I'll talk to you more about that in depth.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And Russell, you're not too far from Fort Collins, correct?
Well, we're 6 hours.
6 hours.
But yeah, we'll be in touch.
There's one more. Let's take Megan Parks. Go ahead. Megan, you might be on mute on your end.
Sorry. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I was muted. Well, the previous question might have answered mine because maybe I can just contact you offline, Russell, but I was wondering if you have done any models of this with child care because as a parent of a young child, that is our largest sort of structural expense as a household.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. That's a great question, and thanks for all those comments. So I think I'm going to answer them all at once. How's that sound?
And there was one more that came in after. Did you want to catch
Sure,
that?
yeah, let's include that one too.
Okay,
and this will be the last one.
Libby, go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering how much time a week do you spend on relationships? Because I'm thinking, excuse me, in 1970, I lived on a communal farm where we tried something like this, and it failed because of the relationship problems. Now, since then, there's been a lot more work in terms of group dynamics and that kind of skill. But I also know, it takes a lot of work because people get their feelings hurt. They think it's unfair. You know, everybody has their own baggage, and when you put it together in a group, you've got to learn how to work in a group. And so how much time do you spend on that?
Man, those are great questions. So I think I want to start at the beginning one, but I will go through all of those. And the first one is this idea about people whose income comes from retirement. And what I think is in a short anecdote, one of the things that started Transition Lab was when I was a high school teacher and I wanted to take my students to Tim DeChristopher's trial in Utah. And Tim DeChristopher was the University of Utah student who disrupted a whole bunch of BLM auctions for oil and natural gas around Arches and Canyonlands National Park. And basically the oil industry prosecuted him and he went to prison for it. And what was interesting about that whole thing is there were two other teachers who took their students as well to the trial, and they both lost their jobs. And I think one of my proudest accomplishments is not getting fired for taking high school kids to that when Homeland Security was there and all sorts of ridiculousness. And it brings up this point is I think that the reason that we haven't already transitioned the world is because, number one, we don't have the economic or social freedom to do so. And there is one demographic in the United States, which are the retiring baby boomers who are now living longer than they ever have before. And they have this 10, 20, maybe 30-year period where they can actively contribute to both the political process and to the local community building process without fear of retribution, without fear of losing their jobs, without fear of losing the basic necessities to maintain their lives. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to offer our students is if you have your basic needs met, not by using the cash economy, but by using these alternative relationship-based economies, then you suddenly get the freedom to do what you want. You get the freedom to follow your heart and to follow your passion and participate in the system in ways that we really need to be doing as citizens right now and not just as consumers. And so that kind of brings me to the second point that you guys brought up, which is really, really true of relationships are hard, and so often money is easy. With the examples of the large population getting their retirement check. That is a very easy relationship to maintain because you're getting that check no matter what. It doesn't matter if there's group fallouts. The check is still coming. Those people have that kind of freedom. But then you get the situation where there's the rest of us. And what I specifically want to address in terms of that conversation or that comment about what happened in the 70s. One of our big business models is that we've been using Daniel Quinn's book for Beyond Civilization. The book is titled Beyond Civilization, and what he talks about is creating new kinds of tribalism. And some of the really important parts of tribalism are actually exclusion and hierarchy, which are things that we tend not to embrace. But I've had to embrace them at Transition Lab, and here's a couple examples. If we are all working together to grow food, number one, there needs to be a boss to make sure that everybody's working equally, because in every single model that I've seen where there's like a consensus-based decision process that decides if everybody's been working equally, that's a great way for people to just learn to hate each other. If you have one person who says, this is the job that we need to get done, I have the unfortunate responsibility of having to have a talking to with people who aren't pulling their weight, and if we all pull our weight on this, then collectively we'll be able to get all of this stuff done. Then we'll be successful. So in terms of actual time I spend on relationships, I spend an incredible amount of time saying no to people who want to come to Transition Lab because they don't have willpower. They don't have a lot of the skills necessary to live in groups together. And so we're exclusive in that way, and I don't feel bad about that at all. Nature does it too. The second thing is that it is somewhat hierarchical in that I have to make a lot of decisions, even to the point of saying sometimes, like, to my students, we're a group here and you need to be serving the group, and if you can't serve the group in these ways, then you're going to need to leave and we're going to have to give you a refund. And then another thing is that I have the highest paid person on Transition Lab who will make more money than I will this year is a woman whose full-time job is a drunken dad court mediator where she does like anger management counseling. And what she does for us is she does a lot of nonviolent communication counseling, remediation activities. And I think that's key. That's really essential to have somebody like that. And even talking with other transition initiatives like Isabel Carlisle, who's doing a similar transition education project in England, what they do is they identified the exact same thing where they give shares of food to voluntary psychotherapists in the community to help people work through their emotional issues. And I think that one of the things that this reveals is interesting is for most of human history, be it until about 1900, we lived in these groups where there were elders around that spent a lot of time on that kind of relationship. Where if you were having a problem with your wife or your neighbor, you'd have aunts, uncles, extended family, neighbors across the street that you could go talk to and get good advice. And we've moved away from that. So yes, I'm having to spend a lot of time doing that relationship. But with that said, I work 40 to 50 hours a week on Transition Lab, and I'd say I only spend 3 or 4 hours. I'm looking at my students like specifically managing relationships or talking about things. I mean, in a sense, it's all relationship, but in terms of specifically saying, like, this is what I need you to do for to get along with the group. It might be less, it might be more. And then in terms of what's next, and with these other questions about like how do we replicate, what I'm really hoping to see is people coming to Transition Lab. And I think this is kind of like the next step for what's on the horizon. There's no reason that out of all of the transition initiatives across the United States right now, in every single one of them, there are people with guest bedrooms, and there are young people who can't afford to pay rent. And there's no reason that this can't start on a one-on-one basis like my wife and I did with our friend Evan, just to try it out and to learn from it. And even to the point where I'm hoping that Carolyn in the Sebastopol area could have more residents living with people who supported the transition initiatives and said, hey, we'll give you free rent, and we want this person to work for Carolyn to get good work done. It doesn't cost anything, and it radically improves the amount of hours that can be committed to a project. So I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to pass the phone over to Jake to talk about. He can talk about his experience. But here's some concrete numbers. Right now, there's 5 of us. Up to date, I've provided affordable housing for 6 people. The 5 of us contribute between 200 and 300 hours of community-based transition work to our community of Montrose, Colorado every week. And when we break that down to like the management costs and everything, what our dollar per hour is Transition Lab costs $1,000 a week to maintain, And for that $1,000, we're putting 300 hours of work into the community doing exactly what we need to be doing. And that's phenomenal. Like you can't find that kind of work anywhere. So that's something that I'm really proud of. At this point, I'm going to just hand the phone over to Jake, and he'll talk about his experience with like the personal freedom and kind of how the economics work for him. And then we'll also turn over the phone to Kevin and then come back to me, and then we'll wrap it up. So here's Jake.
Hey,
y'all.
Go ahead, Jake. I was wondering if I was trying to find you on the roster here. Go ahead.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, I found Transition Lab last year, and I was a student last year, and it was a great game changer in the sense that before moving out to Colorado, I was living in Salt Lake and spending maybe about $1,000 a month on like basics like rent, utilities, and some good healthy food. And I had been doing activism work out there, not making a lot of money, so it was kind of, and then doing web design work on the side to just keep up on the bills. I actually worked with Peaceful Uprising, which was the group that formed after Tim Christopher disrupted the auction that Russell was mentioning earlier. So yeah, and then I moved out here, and that $1,000 a month went down to under $100, and I had to pay a little bit for some supplemental food, but I was getting a lot from the farms, and I was working as a skilled resident, so rent and utilities, $0. And instead, the agreement I had with my host, Cynthia, was that I would work 10 hours a week with her on her project here in the community, which is the local time bank, the time bank of the Rockies. And in addition to that, I would also help her improve the resilience of her home. I have a lot of experience gardening, and I was getting even more of it with the permaculture classes at Transition Lab and with working on the farms. So I was able to put that learning into use to build up her soils and to turn her land and her yard into something that could sustain her and other people in the community. And that was great for me because that's the kind of thing that I really wanted to do. Like when Russell talks about freeing people up to follow their passions and to do, to kind of pursue their gifts and find what their calling really is. Where before I was working so much on the computer to make money to pay for rent, I had to have to do all the gardening and stuff on the side as an extra and with whatever extra energy I had. But then we kind of flipped that on its head, and as a skilled resident, instead of just doing that on the side with whatever time and energy I had left, I was doing that as an integral part of meeting my basic housing needs. And I was also definitely very interested in alternative economic models and tools like a time bank. So I was also really excited to be working right there with Cynthia with an actual established time bank and get more experience with that. And I did that for the whole growing season last year and saved a whole lot of money. And so I didn't have to do all that other work on the side. I was able to kind of be more focused on what do I really want to do and what do I really doing that. And I'm back here this year doing the same thing. And it's great to have another season following up because I did a lot to build up the soils last year, and now I'm getting to plant things and turn it into a permaculture landscape and really follow that through some more. And I'm getting a lot of great experience with teaching, and that's another thing that I'm really kind of feeling called to do, and I look forward to the opportunity to participate in helping Transition Lab spread in towards. So overall, it's I guess this has just really empowered me to. It's like something that Gandhi said. He said, one of his themes was non-participation with that which we don't agree with, or that which we find evil, or that which whatever. And so I was really looking for ways to, like, you know, I saw this growth-based economy is like really the root cause of all of the environmental problems and social problems, and so much of it was, you know, you just follow dollars and find that, you know, it comes down to the way that our economic system works, and I just didn't want to participate in that. And so it's been great for me to find other ways to meet my needs and to kind of like say no to not just say no, but actually to live in my life in a way that says you don't have to do everything through dollars, and you don't have to, like, participating in the extractive economy is not the only way to, you know, to be a human and to make a living on this planet. You know, there's a whole lot more out there, and it's you know, it's easy with it's so entrenched that we can really all get collectively so caught up in that and thinking that that's the only way, but it's so refreshing to kind of break out of that and have a group of really good people to hold that space with, and to support each other through that kind of transition out of dominant economy. I think that's about the extent of what I have.
Thank you, Jake.
This is Russell again, and I'm going to pass the phone to Kevin just for a couple minutes because he's also on this journey of walking away. But I wanted to include Kevin's perspective because Jake's in a position where he doesn't have any college debt. And so he's already been able to take huge steps out of the mainstream economy and be self-reliant, whereas Kevin is working for me for part of his tuition, and he also has a lot of debt. And so I wanted him to talk about specifically what he's doing to both transition the world and make himself happy and meet his financial obligations in the existing economy. So here's Kevin.
Here he is. My name is Kevin Studley, and that's a lot to do, so I'm working towards all of that through very simple solutions. So yeah, I'm a student this year, and as Russell mentioned, I haven't been able to fully pay tuition, so we've set up creative work trade agreements in order for me to do that through several hours of work a week. So that first enabled me to become a student with the Transition Lab, and then from there, I've been taking part in the skilled residency, and like one of the recent papers that we wrote about like our job plans and just like our 1-year plans, and one of them was just like for July of last year to January of this year, I tracked like almost every dollar that I spent to see like what I was spending on food, what I was spending on gas, what I was spending on bills, and so on and so forth. And it came down to about $1,500 a month, which is pretty simple. And so already within just the first 7 weeks of the program, through the skilled residency, not paying rent, that's zero. That's like at least $400 to $500, if not more, taken out of that. We're using our bikes as transportation, so like fuel costs for me driving all over the place are reduced significantly. We're doing the work share with Circle A and Straw Hat, 2 different farms a week. So food costs are close to zero. And then we're doing, we're eating very communally too, and sharing and cooking a lot together. So it's just like getting those basic needs met has been so fulfilling that I'm really looking forward to just over the next 7 months seeing the comparison before and after of my monthly expenditures. And so one of the things with that, though, is I am working a part-time job right now for about 15 to 20 hours a week, and that's just something that I need to do. And in order for me to pursue some of these small business ideas we're talking about is through the skilled residency and work trades for food, I'm getting these expenditures extremely low, but also I will work in the cash economy, work towards paying off my debts, and pursue our small business plans. And one of them is to create a small construction company using waste materials. And so, like, pretty much what we're doing is enabling people like myself who, you know, in the dollar economy, I'm very constrained, I'm very limited and frustrated. Here at Transition Lab, I've developed this civic and economic freedom, and have totally just been able to, and like so excited to pursue things that people have always told me that are not going to make a dollar. I can't, you know, it's not something that's viable to pursue, and it's the total opposite of that. And so I'm sure I could talk a lot more, but that's just kind of like, yeah, you're a living example of that here. So thanks for listening, and I'll give it back to Russell.
Wonderful.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do right now is Jake and Kevin and I are all here, and we will all take questions. So we'll go from there.
Great. So people can press 1 on their keypad with a question for any of our 3 wonderful guests today, or a question more in general about Transition Lab, or any comments. Again, don't be shy. Janice Lynn, go ahead.
Well, Kevin, I understand that you're able to pay tuition. How are you doing that?
So one of the agreements between Russell and I was able to pay some tuition, so about a third of tuition, a little bit more I was able to pay. We also did some different fundraising, some different community organizations donated money or avenues for scholarships. And then pretty much the rest of that, which came out to a little bit more than half, we talked about a work trade agreement. So for 5 hours of work a week, I'm doing different projects in Russell's yard, which we use as a group to grow food. It's a large permaculture garden, and it's going to be feeding all of us and more. And so I'm doing different projects around the yard. I'm going to be installing a solar PV system on his house. And yeah, there's just lots of projects like that that will benefit Transition Lab. Also doing stuff for Jake, because Jake is, you know, a teacher as well. So like something as simple as last weekend, I helped haul alpaca manure, and we came into town and spread it around people's gardens. And so it's just
so
like...
we're talking about 2 different forms of tuition, right? The tuition for the Transition Lab, but also you're going to school, right?
No, so we're talking about one form of tuition for Transition Lab.
That's it.
That's right, yes.
And then
okay.
I think you're also paying back your student loan, which refers to the other form of tuition. Yeah.
That's
okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay.
Other comments or questions? Not seeing any, but I have one. So we've heard from you 3 men, and wondering if you have any women involved in Transition Lab at this point.
Yes, and I don't know where she is. Oh, she's tired and she's taking a nap. And we're respectful men who are going to honor the feminine needs.
Okay. Thank you. Just was curious about that. Kimberly, go ahead.
What do you see as the primary purpose of Transition Lab? It's new to me.
Great question. What I see is that there's no shortage of work that needs to be done to transition a totally unsustainable economy to something that we would enjoy living in. And with that said, there's no way that any of us are going to be capable of leading or taking on all of the projects that need to happen, ranging from babysitting to growing our food to, say, blocking the Keystone Pipeline. And so if I can't do all of those things, which none of us can, but on the other hand, I could create economic models which would not only allow and enable but encourage people to take on the projects that they felt that they were personally best suited for, then we're going to create the kind of transition that we need, and we're going to create the kind of livelihood that we need, and nobody has to be in charge of it. I'm really convinced that people are really good people and that they want to live in a more sustainable, just, fun world. And the only reason that they're not participating more in that world is they're just busy paying their basic bills to get by and living in a dollar economy that is driven by growth and extraction and is intrinsically scarce. So if I can provide these young people with models, and then they can go out into other communities and replicate the models. And if you, over the phone here, and there's a whole section on the website about how to set up your own skilled resident exchange, check that out. And if we can start creating these and start talking and refining models, then I actually do think that we have the capability of building a movement big enough that it can address the biggest challenges of our time.
Thank you for that, Russell. We have Lisa Armstrong, and then I've got another question for you as well. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yes, hi, Russell and the others that are there. I'm really enjoying this, and this is my first exposure to this project as well, or this transition lab. Sort of more nuts and bolts. I'm looking at the page now on your site, excuse me, where it's talking about students live in vacant guest bedrooms and so forth.
Yes.
It seems as if it's a really large space, but is it not? Are they fairly small homes and small gardens, or are you talking about really large spaces?
Great question, and the answer is we'll take anything we can work with where we have a good relationship.
Okay.
So specifically, like, one of our students is living in a dentist's home right downtown in a basement apartment, and there's no room to, say, garden in the backyard. But he really wants, in exchange for providing rent for that student, he really wants that student to be taking on community projects. So one of the things that she helped do is help launch a community adventure film festival in town, and that's just an example of us matching needs to what the community wanted to happen. And then there's other places, like Kevin is living out on a horse ranch, and a lot of the work exchange he'll be doing is just shoveling manure because it needs to be done. Whereas Jake's got some really savvy tech skills, and so he's living with the woman who really needed help with the Time Bank website in our community. So all of these situations are different, but what makes them, what puts them all in the same box for me is that, one, I already have a relationship with all of the people who are hosting my students, so therefore I can trust them, or at least trust them more than a stranger. And the second thing is I spend a whole lot of time in the off season figuring out not only who the students will be, but where they'll live and who will be the best fit. And then we even do like Skype interviews before people even show up in town, to just get even senses of like if you get along with that person or not. And so like one of the things that I would suggest for people who are thinking about replicating these models in their own community is don't even mention sharing a room with people to start out with. Just invite them over for dinner. Say you'll pay them $15 an hour to work on a garden project with you. And you can use those experiences to determine, hey, do you like this person? And two, do they have a work ethic? And if you can't say yes to both of those things, then you probably don't want to pursue it much more. And so what we've basically been doing is just taking these very slow steps. There's been nothing glorious or flashy about inviting somebody over for dinner. But in each one of the steps, it's about building a relationship and then figuring out what's going to work. So that's how we've put it together.
Well, can I follow up with just one other question?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I know I don't want to take much more time, but are the houses in relative proximity to each other?
Yes.
Okay.
Our community is an extremely bikeable community. And so 4 of the 5 of us live within 10 blocks of each other. And then Kevin's living out in the country, but he also has a big dog. And that's one of the reasons that we weren't able to find a place for him closer to town. But what I really want to see is if we look at the principles of permaculture, what they say is what you need is like very dense biodiverse areas that create the shelter for accompanying dense biodiverse areas. And if you just have a whole bunch of plants that could be beneficial to one another, but they're all spread out all over the place, you're not going to get symbiotic relationships. And so the closer that we can put all of these things together, the easier it is to walk across the street and talk to a neighbor and develop that relationship. So that's just kind of a strategic thing that we've done.
Yeah. Okay, great. I really appreciate your answers. That makes a lot of sense. It looks very exciting.
Cool.
And Russell, I have a question. I know that you've been connecting with other people at universities and others sort of in higher education that are intrigued by Transition Lab, and I was just wondering if you had anything to share about that.
You got a couple hours? What we've been doing is we've been talking to Transition Lab has now spoken at 10 different universities, some of the Ivy Leagues and everything from that down to like community colleges. And one of the things that we're really trying to do is revolutionize the model of higher education. But one of the interesting things that we found is that not a lot of colleges are very interested in hearing what we have to say because it would require them to fundamentally change their entire business plan and the inertia of their entire organization. Even though those organizations know that they are going extinct because their tuition is too high and they're struggling to find enrollment, and the next financial crisis is going to be the student loan bubble. And so even though colleges are aware of that, they're hesitant to do anything as radical as we are because they're not up for it. and that's both exciting and really discouraging. And there's a couple colleges that have said, hey, we're going to try to create partnerships with you, but none of them have actually put their money where their mouth is or a lot of their resources towards making that happen. And honestly, that's okay because we're still growing and we're still young and we're still small. If that's still happening 5 years from now, I'm going to be frustrated. But right now it's okay because we're pretty busy doing what we're doing here.
Well, Russell and Jake and Kevin, thank you, and just wanted to give you an opportunity for any closing comments, and then we'll say goodbye for this session. So closing comments, Russell and others?
You guys got any? Yeah, Jake. Jake's got one, and then I've got another, and we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about the skilled resident idea and how it has so much potential. And one of the things we do at Transition Lab is we work to put our ideas and these things into business plans and into livelihoods for us. So Russell and I are working on a project on a website, scarce.com. It's not an open things yet. It's still in a closed testing period. But if there's anyone who's interested in being one of the testers for it and just being in touch with how that project is going, there's a place to request to join at skilledresident.com.
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully have that. Our goal was to have that website up by a month ago, like fully functional, but as all things in life, it hasn't happened according to plan. But it's coming along. And I think that the only comment that I want to leave with here is that it's one of the first comments that I made, which is what Jaime Lerner said, is, if we want to be creative, take zeros out of our budget. Because if we want to create a sustainable future, we need to get away from this cash economy, and we need to take the risk to really try these new things out. And we need to try things out. I know that that's kind of obvious, but there's not a lot of people out there. Like, I'm really excited that there's people on the phone saying, I want to start a transition lab because I want to see labs or organizations or programs like this across the country where people are just trying stuff out and figuring out what works with relationship and what doesn't, and figuring out what does work with cash and what doesn't. And the more that we can try, the better off our movement is going to be to being like sustainable, replicable, and accessible. And then the very last comment is that it's funny because we live in this community where there's a lot of people who are sure that the economy is going to collapse, and they're Tea Partiers, and their solution is buy a bunch of canned food and guns, and they're going to just like fight off the government until Jesus comes or something like that. And when I think about like what I want to do for the future, regardless of what's going to happen with climate change or what happens with the global economy, the way that I really want to live is to have people around me being creative and supporting one another. And that's what we've created already. And that's the way that I want to live, and I think that's the way that everybody else on this phone call wants to live too. And so if we can help you live that way, talk to us, and we'll do our best. So thank you very much.
And Russell, Jake, and Kevin, thank you so much. It's really inspiring. You're doing some really groundbreaking things. You're forging the way for a lot of us, and have a lot of appreciation for you. So again, transition-lab.com is the website.